Hey guys, my name is Daniel Barouse, and today I'm going to show you how to get a flawless finish using Total Boat's tabletop epoxy, just like this. I choose Total Boat's tabletop epoxy over other brands because it's super clear, it's virtually bubble free, it offers a UV protection unlike other cheaper brands, they have great customer service anytime you need help, and it has a wonderful working time. So Total Boat's tabletop epoxy is always my first choice anytime I'm finishing a table. So the materials you're going to need to make sure you have a perfect finish are a torch, a mixing bucket, something to mix the epoxy with, a spreader, and you want to make sure that you have a plastic sheeting to lay down so to catch any drips, and you also want to wear rubber gloves. Alright, so before we get started doing the epoxy pour, you want to make sure you're in a dust-free area because the dust can settle in the epoxy and give it an uneven look. And we want to make sure we're in a well-ventilated area to make sure you're not breathing any VOCs. And the last step is you want to make sure you have plastic down for any drip so you don't make a mess. And you want to make sure that the surface area is completely level. So this is a 1-to-1 mixture. So let's go ahead and get started mixing this. And I'm going to show you what I do for my piece. In this one, you're a 1-to-1 mixture ratio, so you're going to use 1 part A, 1 part B. And they both have different color tops, and you're going to see A and B with different colors on them. So let's start with A. And what I'm going to do for this table is the same process I use for every one of my tables with a tabletop epoxy finish. What I'm going to do at first is I'm just going to do what's called a seal coat. So I'm going to put a very thin coat of epoxy over the entire table. That'll just seal all the bubbles and all the little voids so that whenever we go to actually do the thicker pour, the full final pour, there won't be anywhere for the epoxy to seep into and release as many bubbles. That's what we try to do. So I'm using a Total Boat mixing cup, and so it says Total Boat, and then on the sides they have little granulations. So right here, for a 1-to-1 mixture, 1-to-1 ratio, for a 2-to-1 ratio, a 3-to-1, and 5-to-1. So right now we're using a 1-to-1, so you just got to go up to 3 on the first part and to 3 on the second part, and that'll give you a 1-to-1. So I did 1 part A and 1 part B, the new tabletop epoxy. It's in here, and now we're going to mix it. We're going to get enough to pour on this and then spread a thin coat, which is going to be our seal coat on this table right here. And then once that's cured, we'll do a light sand, and then we'll do our flood coat that'll give us our final finish. So let's do that right now. So now that I have my epoxy poured in the measuring cup, it's time to mix, and I'm just using a scrap chopstick that we made from recycled skateboards to stir it. Whenever you're mixing your epoxy, you want to keep stirring until these cloudy striations turn to clear. You have to mix for about 5 minutes. So now that we've got our epoxy properly mixed, I'm going to go ahead and pour. Okay. I'm just going to spread this around all over. And then I'm using a foam roller to actually spread this around, but you could use anything. You could use a trowel, you could use your hand with a glove, you can use a scrap piece of wood, and you just want to make sure that every piece of wood is covered. Every piece, and wow, it's amazing how many less bubbles there are with this mixture. Normally there's so many bubbles right now. It's definitely like not a perfect finish on the first coat. It will be after the second one, I can tell, but so right now we're gonna wait until tomorrow, let this cure, and then we'll come back and we'll do a light sand and then our full flood pour where we should have a final product. I'm pretty excited. All right guys, so we're back in the shop. So I'm showing you my process on how to do a tabletop epoxy finish coat and get a perfect result. So after day 2, the first day we did a seal coat where we put a very thin coat of tabletop epoxy on the surface of the entire table. And this allowed the epoxy to seep into the pores of the wood and reduce any bubbles for the future. The next step that we do is we turn the table over and you take some blue tape and I tape up right all the way to the edge of the underside of the piece. All of my coffee tables receive a double chamfered bevel on the top and the bottom. So I come all the way up just like a 1/16 away from the edge of the bevel on the bottom. And this is so whenever the drips occur from all the epoxy dripping down, instead of having to sand them all off, we just pull this tape off and all the drips come with it. And it usually leaves a really nice edge on the bottom. All right, so now that I got my edge taped up on the bottom, we're gonna flip it over. We're gonna do a very light sand with 220, and this will just smooth out the surface, and then we're gonna do a pour. So let's do that now. Looking at this piece, you guys can like bring the camera over here, Johnny. You can see that this isn't all the way smooth, and there's a couple like high points right here. It looks like a piece of dust got under the epoxy, and the same right here. So what we're gonna do now is just bring all the high points down. And this will take like maybe 5 minutes to do at 220, and then we'll be ready for the second coat. All right, so you guys come check out right over here. So this is something I should talk about. Whenever you're sanding the edges, if you pass a sander over and like come bring it over here, Johnny, you see how there's this faint cloudy line that appears? That means that there's a drip that's forming on the edge. So what we have to do is we have to sand this little line down flush on the edge so that the next coat doesn't build on top of it and accentuate that drip. So what I'm doing now is I'm gonna take my sander and sand right here just until this little line disappears. So if you guys watch right here. Okay, so now we see that line is gone, but I didn't break all the way through the epoxy seal coat. I just sanded this flush, and I'm gonna do this around the edge of the entire table so that this drip doesn't just build up over coats. All right, so now that we've got our table sanded and taped, we're gonna take a little rag and just wipe away the dust. Wipe away the dust on the whole piece. It's looking super good. And then we're gonna mix up another round of tabletop to pour. So this time there's gonna be a lot of drip. So we're gonna make sure that our plastic sheathing is nice and spread out because it's definitely gonna drip. And one thing I have learned about with tabletop epoxy is it sucks to waste material, but to get a finish that's really, really good, it's better to err on the side of more than less. So, and what I mean by that is whenever we mix, we want to mix enough to where we want to spread it, but we don't want to have to spread it. We want gravity to be able to do its thing and create a fully level surface. And I have found that the best way to achieve that is, like I said earlier, to put more than you think you need so that gravity can do its thing and you can get a nice level surface. So that's what we're gonna do right now. Let's mix it up and pour it. So we have our mixing bucket, and again, this tabletop formula is 1-to-1 mix ratio. So we're gonna take our Total Boat mixing cylinder, and then right over here we're gonna find 1-to-1. I think to get a proper coat across this whole thing, 3 and 3 is plenty. So we're gonna fill the first part up to 3 and the second part up to 3. And then we'll mix and pour. Part A, again, 1-to-1. We're gonna find our 1 and we're gonna mix all the way up to 3. And this is part B. This is way too much. Okay. So we just went right up to, we found the 1-to-1, and then we went to 3 on each one. All right, now we're gonna take our mixing stick, which is a scrap recycled skateboard chopstick, and we're gonna mix. And again, whenever you mix, you're gonna see these white lines appear, and you wanna mix your epoxy until those white lines are all gone. You'll see some bubbles come in the mixture a little bit from when you're stirring. But the big thing we wanna eliminate here is those white lines. And it usually takes anywhere from like 3 to 5 minutes to mix epoxy properly. All right, so now our epoxy is properly mixed. So if you look in here, there's no more white lines. You'll see some bubbles, but all of these are gonna go away whenever we pour. So now let's pour. And what I'm gonna do here is pour more than you think you need. And I'm gonna leave a little bit in the bucket in case there are low spots that we need to fill up. So one thing that I do is to get the edges right, I kind of use a trowel and bring a bead and make sure that it overflows on every spot. On every spot, we want it to overflow just a little bit. That's a little too much. Then I'll come back on the top and give it a light spread, and then again just let gravity kind of do its thing. Once I've got a little bit of epoxy on the borders, I take my hand with my glove and I just run it across the edge. And this usually smooths everything out enough to allow for gravity to do the remaining work and it to come out perfect. Now I'm looking at this table and there's a few low spots, which is what the extra in the bucket is for. So like on this side and a little bit over here, there's some low spots. So what we're gonna come do is just add a little more right where the low spots are. We're gonna add this, and that should fix the low spots. So we got our epoxy poured. Everything looks really great. There's a few minimal bubbles. I'm gonna wait a second and then I'm gonna hit it with a light torch to release any surface bubbles. And then we're gonna let it cure and we're gonna come back tomorrow and see how she looks. So whenever you're torching, you don't wanna get too close to the epoxy because the heat can actually speed up the cure time in the areas where you get too close, and then you'll get an uneven surface. So what we're gonna do is turn this torch on and just very lightly, 1 or 2 times, quickly pass over every spot. And watch as the bubbles release. So we hit it with a torch, we poured our epoxy, everything looks super good. So now we're gonna wait until tomorrow and then see how it looks. All right guys, so we're back in the shop. We have our coffee table with our finish coat of the new tabletop epoxy formula from Total Boat, and it looks killer. So the next step for this piece is to flip it over, and we're gonna take the tape and all the drips off, and then we're gonna attach the legs, and this piece is done. You can see the tape is definitely the way to go. So the drips just come right off now. Okay. All right, so we just got the legs put on this table, and now we get to see it completed for the first time with the new Total Boat Tabletop Epoxy formula.
And it goes on any wood finish so long as that finish is full. Twice as good and 4 times as durable in under a minute. And no, this is...
All right guys, so we just finished up this beautiful coffee table using the tabletop epoxy formula. It's something that anybody can do. It's super easy to use. It gives you a flawless finish that stays looking great for years to come. And if you guys want to check out any other products from Total Boat, please visit totalboat.com. And if you guys want to see any more of our work, you can look us up on any social media site or go to barusporks.com. Thank you.